Hello everyone and welcome to the Racing Together webinar series. And this time we're on our third episode of 6, and there's plenty more interesting ones to come, which we'll explain a little bit later on at the end of the session. You can also catch up on the previous 2 webinar recordings, and they are available as videos and podcasts, so make sure you check them out as well. Just a little bit of information for you. The recordings will be viewed online after today's session, both on YouTube, and podcast links will be emailed out afterwards. And if you want to sign up to the newsletter to find out about future episodes, and also make sure you can just write in the chat the questions that you'd like to put to our panelists throughout the session, then make sure you feel very welcome to do so. So we've got quite a lot to get through. So I'm Hayley Moore. My background is growing up in a racing family. I used to work in the stables for my grandfather, then my dad. I've ridden as an amateur jockey over jumps on the flat and enjoyed that for a good few years. Went around the world racing, which was a wonderful opportunity, either race riding internationally in part of the Fugentry series or taking horses abroad, and in being immersed in the horse racing scene here in the UK. My older brother's a flat jockey, and my other older brother's a jump jockey, my younger brother's a jump jockey, and my dad continues to train. It's very much a family operation. And I myself still ride out in the mornings, but I also present for Sky Sports Racing, and I've been out and about on course for them and in the studios for a good few years now. I think about 4 years. So there's lots of different angles of the sport that I've enjoyed in my lifetime. So I'm very appreciative of horse racing and everything that it's given me in my lifetime, really. I've got a wonderful panel which I'd like to come and say a quick hello to, and I'll come to you first, John. If you could just tell us a little bit about what your role is and why you're here today.
Yes, thank you, Hayley. So my name is John Yates. I'm the Chief Executive of Berkshire's Community Foundation. We are an organisation that partners with other local organisations, trusts, private individuals and businesses to deliver their philanthropic aims through grants predominantly to small local voluntary organisations. And we work very closely with Ascot Racecourse here in Berkshire as a partner to what they want to do with regard to their, grandly speaking, CSR programme or their ESG programme, depending on your what you're using these days. Personally, my dad was a publican in Cheltenham. I grew up in Cheltenham many years ago, and I have a personal understanding of the power of a racing event on the local economy, on the local community, and increasing the takings in my dad's bar during the festival week in March was always an interesting one. But we like to deliver social benefit from the good offices of the people we work with, and corporates are a very big part of that for our work in Berkshire. But I'd like to say that there are 47 community foundations the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, and most of those, either counties or conurbations, will have some sort of racing facility in or close by. So I'd like to see links grown, perhaps from initiatives like this, to see what partnerships can be delivered and up and down the country.
Yeah, John, thank you very much. We'll get back to you very shortly. Paul, what's your role, and what have you got to explain with what you're offering in the horse racing world as well?
Thanks, Ellie. So my name's Paul Swain. I'm the Race Day Experience and Comms Manager for the Racecourse Association. All tracks in Britain are our members, so whatever the project is, we look after all the tracks within those projects. With community engagement, we've worked with Racing Together for a number of years now to try and help racecourses understand the importance of community engagement, and to develop initiatives that will not only benefit the locality, their neighbours, but also themselves and the teams working at the racecourses. It's been a really fulfilling project, and I think it came to a head really over the last 18 months with the pandemic, and we've had to work really closely with the courses and Racing Together to not only help them to survive as businesses, but also to utilise the resource that they did have that was spare, which wasn't much, but it spread really far across their communities. And as we'll come on to today, some of the work that racecourses did over the last 18 months was truly remarkable and has made such a difference to people's lives. And the beauty of it is that we'll they will have legacies to build on in future, and those partnerships will be maintained and will flourish, no doubt. So yeah, we've worked with all the tracks as we do on all projects. This is a particular one that's close to my heart because I was involved with Racing Together right from the beginning. So it's lovely to see it sort of develop as it has, and we're able to share that knowledge across the race courses now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Annamarie, I'll come to you. What's your role in the world of horse racing now, and a bit about what you've previously been up to in your lifetime?
Thanks, Hayley, and thank you very much for inviting me today. It's lovely to be here talking with everyone. So my name's Annamarie Phelps, and I'm the chair of the BHA, which is the national governing body for horse racing and the regulatory authority. And my background is across a number of other sports. I also work quite a bit in Olympic sports. I was previously chairman of British rowing. So I come to racing with a very different sort of outlook. That's not to say I've not been racing very much. I've done an awful lot of racing in the last couple of years, but also I grew up with a very Irish family. We did a lot of racing when we were younger, and had good friends whose parents had national hunt horses. So spent a lot of my teenage years hanging over the rails and watching jockeys like your family, Hayley. And I'm passionate about sport being inclusive and open to everybody and accessible to everyone. And part of my role, obviously, is to make sure, a very large part of my role as a governing body is to look at the long-term health and sustainability of the sport. And I truly believe that horse racing will only be absolutely sustainable and will carry on in a healthy way if it's truly inclusive of everyone in its local communities and brings in the widest possible and most diverse interests and crowds, both into its workforce, but also into its fan base.
Cool. Thank you very much. And finally, Mike, tell us a little bit about what you do, your background, and what we might learn from you as well.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm the imposter here, I guess, not from the horse racing fraternity. I'm the chief exec of the EFL Trust, EFL being the English Football League, the Trust being the charitable arm of the English Football League, and we work with the 72 football clubs in the EFL, or more specifically their charitable arms. That network engages with around 1 million people every year on a whole range of community initiatives. And as the national umbrella body for that network, we provide them with information, advice, guidance, lobby government on their behalf to try and get more advocacy for the work that they do, and also funding to support that work. I'm thinking that I'm here today because I think the response of the EFL clubs, in particular during the pandemic, was extraordinary. Football clubs being such key anchor organisations in their communities, and did a lot of really incredible work that I'm sure we'll explore during the course of the session. And from a horse racing perspective, other than an annual trip to Cheltenham with a family that's fairly mad on horse racing, I can't tell you a lot.
That's at least you enjoyed Cheltenham. That's great. Thank you very much. I'm just going to let everyone know some of the wonderful ongoings that did take place. But the point of today's webinar is to focus on the power of sport to help people. What did we learn from racing's response to COVID-19 in support of communities? So we just need to explore a little bit about the benefits that took place in our sport, and if this is a model for increasing community activity longer term now, and has COVID set a higher bar and a larger expectation, which I think we all learned a lot over the last 18 months. And it's, I think, coming back and hearing a little bit about what Mike can offer us will be very useful, if anything. But just going back to what took place during the pandemic, this is very much just a brief summary of some of the things that went on that I thought were very interesting. 12 or more racecourses became testing or vaccination hubs. Ascot Racecourse worked with some of their commercial partners to chauffeur doctors and NHS supplies between Frimley Health Trust sites, totaling over 1,400 hours. Their Royal Ascot fundraising campaign also raised over £400,000 for health charities. Arena Racing Company donated over 9,500 emergency supply boxes via local authorities in the areas surrounding Newcastle, Chepstow, Fontwell, Wolverhampton, Great Yarmouth and Doncaster. Aintree has donated 10,000 Grand National Festival tickets to local NHS teams for 2022. And Newbury Racecourse worked alongside Age Concern, Newbury and District, to feed the most vulnerable elderly via Meals on Wheels in West Berkshire using their kitchens, and other broader activities involved volunteering efforts, food donations and food banks, check-in calls and providing accommodation for the NHS workers. Now that's just a brief roundup of some of the things that took place. So Paul, I'd like to come to you. If you could just elaborate a little bit on how the race courses did come together and help out and what we could do going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you've highlighted some really good examples there, Hayley. And as it became apparent what was going on with the lockdown and we weren't going to be able to race, certainly for a few months at least, it became quite clear that race courses were in a position of, okay, what can we do to help? Because we've got people in, we've got facilities, we've got a key place in society that means we have the ability to be able to help our neighbours. And I think that's quite a key point, because race courses have been there for many years. In some cases, they've been there for centuries. If you think back to Ascot, for example, they hold a very strong place in the community, and people, you know, generally like going. It's a place they feel comfortable. It's a place they look to sort of from fond memories. So there's that. They've got those aspects going for it as well. So in many cases, race courses looked at what was required, what could they do to help the community, and just based it on local need. So you mentioned the vaccination testing centres. Lots of tracks did become those, and there's some that you mentioned sort of 12 or more. It's quite an odd phrase, I know, but it's because of the fact that a number of them we can't mention because of NDAs or NHS, but there was a lot of jabs and tests offered that definitely saved lives. The race courses understood they had the facilities and the ability to host those events due to their really good organisational skills. You look a bit more widely about what other things they've got. Take an audit of a typical race course. A lot of them have on-site accommodations. It's typically used for stable staff, but that could be used and was used to help NHS staff who, at the time, if you remember, couldn't go home. They couldn't mix with their families because of the uncertainty about the virus at the time. So a number of race courses used their hotels, for example, for NHS staff. I think Hamilton Park did a really good example of that. So York, there's lots of others that did it too. And the key thing that they did was just to audit what they have and use those facilities to help others. And there's lots of examples we could go into. I mean, Perth gave away radios from their medics to give to the NHS frontline, for example. York gave away 15,000 plants that would have been used for the Dante Festival to help people who were stuck in lockdown. What can they do? What do they like doing? People like gardening, therefore come and take these plants off us. Salisbury Racecourse looked at their IT equipment, things they wouldn't be using, but realised that the schools in the local community required IT to get kids back home, learning from home. So they donated all those computers and machines that enabled lots of children to then go and learn. So it was really a case, as I say, of just looking at what they had, what they could do with the time available to them, and to spread that generosity across their localities, which, you know, was really well received by the beneficiaries.
Yeah, and it felt as though the race courses, the things that they put together, made a real strong impact for everyone locally. I mean, down in London, of course, the Excel Centre became Florence Nightingale Hospital, and that was great, but that was almost underused at the time, whereas what the race courses had ready to go in such a short space of time meant they were really important and influential in such desperate times.
Of course, and the one I mentioned there, I think, is a really nice example. Is I mentioned that familiarity piece about people, racegoers, people who live near the race course. They know it, they understand it, they've got fond memories there, they're happy to go. And that was all apparent at Warwick Racecourse, which at the time, I'm talking sort of March, April, May 2020, hospitals and GP surgeries were overwhelmed and people didn't feel comfortable going to them, even if they had an appointment, because of the virus was just exploding at the time. So Warwick actually set up as almost like a proxy surgery to run routine blood tests and other sort of routine medical appointments that typically you'd have to go to your GP office or your local hospital to do. The hospital was able to set up using the space at Warwick. And lots of people came because they felt comfortable to do it. And I think sport is a passion thing, isn't it? We all love sport. We love our football club, we love our racecourse, we love our rugby club, whatever it might be. And because you have that affinity within you to go and feel like you're part of that community, part of that sport, part of that venue, it enabled things like the activity at Warwick to happen. And that's something that all racecourses have with their racegoers and in their communities, which was evident throughout the work that was done in the pandemic.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and from a range of different age groups as well, most importantly, which is something that we must be proud about. John, I'll come to you. What about the Berkshire community, and what did they need? And just explain a little bit about the community foundations everywhere and how they can come together.
So it was an extraordinary time. If we look back to March last year, funds raised and put through us to support local communities were 3 times what we would normally do in a financial year. So we were able to support 3 times as many projects. So we did something like 450 grants in 12 months to April of this year. So those are projects of, say, £4,000, £5,000 grants. So we gave out about £3 million. Pretty much entirely, it was a private philanthropic response that was able to react so quickly. I don't want to get political or anything, but the more statutory response and national government response took more time to come through. But that initial element of response, the emergency response, certainly in the spring of 2020 and leading into the summer, relied very heavily on private philanthropy. Now, I use the word philanthropy, which can put people off, but essentially modern philanthropy is the use of resources to meet a need. Nothing more, nothing less. And Paul's really touched on that, and you have, Hayley, in terms of what racecourses are able to do and other sporting facilities up and down the country in making resources available. And at the time, these were resources that they weren't able to employ. I'm thinking about spaces, I'm thinking about people's time. So it was remarkable, the response. And the work we did with Ascot was very much a part of that private philanthropic response to meet need, in our case, in Berkshire. I'd love to do more work with Newbury and Windsor, actually, Paul, so I may get in touch with you afterwards, forgive me.
By all means.
But I would also say that, and Paul's touched on this, the response there then also came in three areas. One, it is money. Fundamentally, it's about making resources that you might be using elsewhere or want to use elsewhere available to target social need. And the emergency response was such that we had voluntary groups popping up to access services and help people who were isolating, older and vulnerable people. We had community hubs forming that we haven't had for a number of years to try and bring volunteer efforts together to try and make sure that nobody was doubling up when they're missing other areas and all that kind of stuff, which was remarkable. We then went into what's called a sort of a sustainability phase, and a lot of groups and a lot of sports groups, and Mike might be aware of this, actually couldn't do anything. So small voluntary sector sports clubs and associations actually had to shut down. They couldn't do anything, and we couldn't fund them to carry on existing. We could only fund organisations who were actually delivering part of the emergency response to help people in need because of the pandemic. But those groups themselves then needed help to continue to exist so they could continue to respond. So we had to sort of change our focus slightly to help groups carry on paying the rent, carry on putting the lights on, to employ a volunteer coordinator because they'd been festooned with people on furlough who wanted to support their work, but they had nobody they could pay to manage it because it became a real issue. At the same time, their traditional volunteers were all isolating, of course, and weren't allowed to volunteer anymore because those are the kinds of people that were traditionally supporting them. Very complex. And then the third phase into the late autumn and into the winter was what we refer to as adaptation. So groups were now looking to come back online and deliver their traditional services, but they didn't want to do them face-to-face necessarily. So it was bringing services online. We funded a lot of equipment. We funded a lot of Wi-Fi subscriptions. We funded this and that to help groups deliver service. There's one group that we funded with Ascot particularly. I'll come back to that in a minute because Ascot were able to put a lot of funds through us. The virtual fundraising around the Royal Ascot Week of 2020 and the auction and everybody wearing a hat and all that was phenomenal. But they were able to adapt what they did to raise money. And we've been working with Ascot for 4 years now. I think we've delivered something like £180,000 of grant funding as part of that relationship, and we look forward to it continuing. But the other thing, of course, they were able to do is free up other resources. And we help them identify volunteering opportunities as well as the work that you've already outlined, which is fantastic. And the third thing is the space. So we have our annual showcase event for our donors, and we tend to go to Ascot because it's such a beautiful place. When we were asked to arrange a visit for the Earl of Wessex to thank the voluntary sector of Berkshire, we went to Ascot and said, could you host this for us? And it was a beautiful day with 150 people getting a cream tea and a gift from Ascot and being thanked for the work they did. So it's a whole range of things that racecourses up and down the country will be of different sizes and have different facilities. But if they can engage with just a part of their local voluntary sector, I think it's a wonderful exhibition of commitment that we've seen. And I would like to think that sporting facilities and racecourses will get a dividend from loyalty and increased footfall as a result of where they've been seen to be supporting people who are in such need, one of the people most in need when they needed it most. So that's the private philanthropic response from Ascot to us, for example, was absolutely phenomenal. And I don't think this country would have come out the way we have without that private philanthropic response.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to just share a video from the English Football League, and then we'll catch up with Mike off the back of it.
When the pandemic hit in March 2020, clubs came together as a force for good, and were among the first to respond to the needs of the local communities across England and Wales. Clubs and the club community organisations adapted their outreach programmes in line with government guidance and restrictions to ensure the safe continuation of their incredible work. This provided a lifeline for so many, helping to keep people healthy, active and connected, from Cardiff to Carlisle and Bristol to Blackpool. Clubs and CCOs continue to provide vital support to some of the country's most vulnerable people. During the pandemic, EFL clubs and community schemes have delivered over 1.4 million food parcels, made over 500,000 phone calls to elderly and vulnerable people, as well as their season ticket holders, donated over 2,000 laptops to local schools, distributed almost 200,000 items of PPE, footballers signed up to volunteer for the NHS, and weekly garden gate visits to the most vulnerable and lonely. The response from football clubs to the individual needs of their communities during what has been an incredibly difficult period should never be forgotten, only built upon. An unprecedented time, a team effort, a beautiful game.
That's a very warming video. And Mike, if you could just very briefly tell us how you began this wonderful trust in the English Football League, and how did it grow? And then if you could go on to what we can learn from your experiences and lessons in horse racing, but obviously probably not on such a grand budget, but I'm sure something obviously can always still be achieved.
I mean, you make an interesting point about budget. I mean, the 72 charities linked to the football clubs are all independent charities with their own sort of fundraising strategies. There is some central money goes in from football to support the network, but it's probably about 12% of the overall funding model. And what you've just seen there in the pandemic, the guys have already alluded to it, particularly John talking about philanthropy in terms of giving resources, and football did the same. They gave time, they gave the stadia to really support the pandemic. But a lot of the projects that our charities are delivering day to day, week to week, are funded programs. They're commissioned services where they're commissioned by the local authority to provide support to older people in the community, or to provide school support, or to provide obesity programs for young people who are referred to them by GPs. So they're quite entrepreneurial businesses in a way, but really responding to the needs of their local community. And when you say when did that start? That kind of started in the 1980s, to be honest, with ex-players going into schools with a bag of balls and doing football coaching, and earning some sort of income from the schools and running Saturday morning clubs and holiday clubs and that sort of thing. And we came into being as the EFL Trust in 2007, 2008, and started to professionalise what was going on in clubs, make sure community departments were set up as independent charities, put strong governance around them, and create a network that we could then advocate, as I said earlier, to government and to national partners. And some of the biggest programmes that are run across the country now are things that we as the EFL Trust have managed to win and tender for on their behalf. And going into the pandemic, you didn't have to be a clairvoyant to understand, what problems the pandemic was going to throw up. I think the only thing that we really got wrong when we analysed what was going on in March last year was how long this was going to go on for. I think, none of us would have predicted that. But as a charity that tries to reduce the chasms that exist in our society, it was clear that the pandemic was just going to make them worse. Those in professional jobs who could work from home were going to do okay out of it. Those on the front line were either going to be exposed to a lot of risk or lose the jobs. Older people who were isolated and told to stay at home were going to be even more isolated. Kids who aren't getting enough exercise were going to get less exercise. So these things were all fairly predictable. And I guess being on the front foot with some of those things and having such a strong network at our disposal to make the case to government, look, we can really help you with this, I think was useful. Again, as I think John said, government, it reacted as quickly as it could, but it took time to get resource to the front line. And that's where I think all of sport, football clubs, horse racing, rugby league, in our neck of the woods, the clubs were just out there straight away. And it was almost like, we need to support our communities and we'll worry about how we pay for it later. And that sort of, that can-do attitude that I think was really prevalent across sport, really showed the great side of what we're all involved in.
Thank you very much, Mike. Annamarie, if I could come to you and just ask you about what's your experience and some of the examples in sport and how it can help people outside of racing, and some of the things that you might have seen that have taken place in racing to help people as well. Oh, if you're right to unmute yourself, Annamarie. Thank you.
Sorry, that was a mistake, wasn't it? I think, happy to focus on the in-racing bits. I don't want to steal Mike's thunder, but I'm a Queen's Park Rangers fan, and I would say QPR are one of the best community clubs ever. We have a massive, reliance on the local community, on the club and what they deliver. But I think any sport, all sports came together really well. And I think that's partly because sports generally tend to be built around a team. And I think, racing has stable yard teams and the teams on racecourses that deliver. And if a really strong team, I always think, has three things: as a shared identity and a common mission. And that's usually around the love of horses and the delivery of success for either for those horses or on a race day. But equally, there is an understanding in all teams about the unique contribution that different people and different parts of that make. And I think on two levels, both within our stable yards and across our race courses and all the ancillary businesses around us, that there is that sort of team spirit and that understanding you have to come together and do what you can. And that agility that we've talked about and that rapid response is exactly because of that. And I think racing responded really well on lots of different levels. It responded really well on a very personal level immediately, about supporting those people immediately around it. And we've seen some fantastic celebrations since, where this easing slightly in that lovely period before we had this new variant of celebrations at the BHA. We had a celebration of all the work that our staff did, called the Lockdown Oscars, and that was really about people who supported others who were furloughed and isolated, people that went out and did fantastic work in their local communities. And then there was the sort of the wider racing community response and ancillary businesses about helping the non-racing community as well. And then that level of sort of national efforts that the racecourses specifically probably had the ability and the capacity to deliver against. And I think, you know, the work that went on, not just on racecourses, but around our yards, the sort of development of the work our charities were doing, some of the things that were, you know, done just even on social media, just to keep people engaged in that short period of time, were fantastic. And, you know, often they're people that are doing these sorts of things all the time. I know people like Richard Phillips, you know, is a constant supporter of community efforts and bringing people together and doing things, but they continued to do that. And I was also really heartened and, you know, warmed by other things. And betting shops, you know, that I attended the Betting Shop Champions Awards recently, and those people in betting shops who'd reached out to their clients to make sure on a daily basis they were okay, that questioned them about being isolated, that made sure that they were being responsible in their gambling and things during that period, have been fantastic. The likes of Debbie Matthews at Go Racing Green, who continued to reach out and support people remotely, and try to keep people sort of talking, and people supporting our other charities that look after the horse-human sort of relationship, that the Great Woods and the Horseback UKs of this world, that, you know, had to still carry on as yards did, working day in, day out, because they had those horses. So, you know, for racing to have found time and resource and capacity to do this in an industry where it is relentless 24/7 caring for horses and for those people and their communities, I think it was a fantastic effort. And I'm incredibly proud of the response that we gave at all levels to this, you know, to be able to support communities and national efforts.
Yeah, some really important things highlighted there. I've got a question to the panel. Do you think that sports reputation, and specifically racing's, been enhanced with the wider public as a consequence of its focused work during the pandemic? Anyone wants to answer that one?
From my perspective,
oh, sorry, John, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, from my perspective, as a partnership organisation with a racecourse, absolutely, 100%, and deserves to be recognised as such, and deserves to get, as I mentioned earlier, on that dividend of loyalty and return going forward. The challenge we have as a society is continuing to support these organisations on a more sustainable basis as life returns to, inverted commas, normal, and people go back to their normal activities. But these groups had, as Mike was saying, the needs these groups support were there before the pandemic. They're exacerbated by the pandemic and will continue to be there after the pandemic. And we need to make sure that we as a society are able to meet needs through the work that they provide. Yeah. But yes, big thumbs up from me. Thank you, everybody.
Paul, what were you going to say?
Well, I agree with John to an extent. You know, I mean, I mentioned at the start of the chat the word legacy and what happens next, because the relationships that were created were incredibly powerful. But the important thing is what happens, you know, ongoing, you know, for the next couple of weeks, months and years. And one example I can think of, which is again is an Ascot one, sort of from what John said, was they achieved a great deal with the Frimley NHS Trust, which I believe prior to the pandemic, there wasn't a significant relationship there between the two bodies, whereas now there is, and they're already planning for things in the future away from the pandemic to help support the Frimley NHS Trust using the racecourses reach and resource. So that's one example. But yes, I do think that the racing's reputation can only be enhanced by this, purely because of the significant work that was undertaken and the different things that were done. It was not just about fundraising or just about philanthropy, as was mentioned, or volunteering or whatever it might be. That we covered so many areas, and I really like the video that Mike showed with the season ticket holders kind of being contacted and the vulnerable being looked out for. And that happened at racecourses too. And I think that if you are a family member of one of those people, say you're an annual member at a racecourse and you are elderly and you couldn't get out, but you knew that your mother or father was getting that phone call from the racecourse to check in and sometimes order prescriptions and get them delivered. That can only be good. And I think that, Annamarie mentioned team, and it was a team effort, and across all aspects of the racecourse, the teams did get involved. And as I say, I think that can only help. I think it's a yes, but with caveat, important we maintain those relationships and keep the legacy, or do the legacy proud as it should be done.
Yeah, COVID has changed things forever, hasn't it, within sport? And Annamarie, do you think there's going to be that expectation now, especially the platform that racing has, to carry on?
I do hope so. I mean, I think that it's been really interesting hearing from Mike how these are 75 different charities, all with their own strategies. But it appears, and particularly through the short video that you've got, that this is some sort of massive coordinated strategic kind of plan. And I think that there is more that racing can do. I think we certainly will have impacted those people we touched, and certainly will have enhanced the reputation of racecourses with those people we've worked with through the last 18 months. But I would question whether we've done enough to tell the wider world about the good stuff that we've done. And I think that requires a much more coordinated approach across the whole industry, and a really, something like racing together to take that lead role in pulling things together and helping to support the production of these sorts of films, so that the first thing people don't think about when they think about horse racing are the negative things that they might think, but is actually about the fantastic work that goes on day in, day out already, and the new work and the much more sustainable contribution that we can make to those communities. So I think that it's been great. I think it probably has changed individuals, but I think we can do a lot more.
Okay, Mike, how can we do a lot more in horse racing?
I think Annamarie's just raised a really good point there. I mean, we are a disparate network of 72 charities. They are individual charities, but we are also a very sort of well-coordinated network nationally. So we have national programs that run across the whole country, that we manage, we tender for with government, we manage. But the richness of what clubs deliver individually is what makes us so much stronger. 80% of the funding in the network is generated locally. So that fantastic programme that QPR might be running, or Burton Albion or Sunderland, we go up, we see that, we share that best practice around the network. If we think it's something that can go national, we might pilot it with half a dozen charities. And all the time we're building that case to say, okay, where do we take this to get it funded nationally? And it's just a constant cycle. And the video is a great example of, that's a professional production. This is where EFL, as the commercial body, as the league, is investing in us as their charity to make sure that we've got good collateral to show off our work. Because obviously there's a benefit for them as well as a great partner of government. And without getting into too much detail, the recent review by government into football is very much in favour of the EFL, of the smaller clubs, of the grassroots clubs, and is really asking the Premier League to dig deeper into its pocket to support those of us lower down the pyramid. So there's a quid pro quo for the commercial side of the sport, as well as it being the right thing to do in communities. One feeds the other. And in terms of government recognition, I mean, the best example I've got of that was the Department for the DCMS, Culture, Media and Sport. They opened up a fund to support older people very early in the pandemic. And they wanted to engage organisations that could deliver quickly and at scale to reach older people. And it isn't just season ticket holders. We have a number of programmes that run with older people. And we received the biggest grant from that programme, bigger than Help the Aged, bigger than Age UK, because the government recognised that we could actually reach their target audience more quickly than those charities, who have that as their sole objective. So there is definitely an understanding of the reach of sport. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep building that reputation, because they understand we've got the engagement, but what they also need to understand is that we deliver excellence. And the two go hand in hand. And I think if we get that right, they'll continue to invest in us to deliver these services.
Horse racing's all year round, so we've obviously got the flat scene and the jump scene that gets into full top gear, especially the next few months for the jumping. Is it an annual thing? Is it a quarterly thing for us, do you think, to get our messages of positivity out there?
I think it's an ongoing thing. I mean, our competition in theory is seasonal, but summer is one of our busiest periods because we deliver a lot of summer activity for school children in particular. So the holiday activity and food program for young people on free school meals. There's £280 million in the new budget a year to provide that service to young people. And I think 60 of our 72 clubs are commissioned to deliver that. And a couple of clubs, Blackpool and Nottingham Forest, actually run the whole provision for their local authority and commission others to deliver it as well and manage that whole process. So you can see how far they've developed as organisations over the last 20 years. And
Mike, I've just got a question in for you that says, can you give an insight into some of the EFL Trust programmes?
So our biggest single programme is called National Citizen Service, NCS, which is a government-funded programme to build life skills resilience in 15 to 17-year-olds. Our probably other biggest programme is called Fit Fans, which works with males over 35 who are at risk of obesity and diabetes. We have a university programme that we run with the University of South Wales, where we've got 600 full-time students based at football clubs, but working, going down to Cardiff for residentials to future-proof our workforce. We have a programme called Communities United, which brings different sections of the community together from different faiths and religions. So our tackling loneliness aimed specifically at those over 60 living in isolation. So it's a really wide range of stuff. Probably the website's the best place if people want more information, and happy to follow up with anyone individually.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating to hear such a variety that I didn't have any idea about, so that's great, thank you. I am very aware of time. I didn't know if there's anything that our panelists would like to just say before we sign off. Is there anyone that would just like to conclude? Any thoughts, observations going forward?
Just one thought, Hayley, that this is, we talked very about this as a concept, but actually always remember that there are really a lot of people who've benefited enormously from the work that's already been done and will continue to be done. You know, children with learning difficulties, disabilities, people suffering from domestic violence, the ongoing mental health issues that have been created, and the whole gamut of the human experience, which was, as we say, exacerbated by the pandemic. So whatever you continue to do, it will be of great value, and giving is always good. It's always a great part of your ongoing business model. So if you want to talk to your local community foundation, wherever you're in the country, get in touch with me through these people, and I'll be happy to make an introduction, because it's always worth a conversation and a cup of tea.
It certainly is. John, thank you so much, and thank you to the rest of my panelists as well, Paul, Annamarie and Mike. You've all been so interesting, and it's great to hear your thoughts, and just to spread the good word as well about everything that's happened in such difficult times. I know I was very grateful to be back at work on the 2nd of June, which seemed quite remarkable. So and with good stories along the way. You can also tune into the next 3 webinar series that are taking place, and that will be next week, next Thursday. There is a limit to, is there a limit to racing's accessibility, and Rishi Prasad will be there to take us through all of that. And then there's a couple more a little bit later on, which you can see there on the screen now, hopefully. So Thursday at 12:30 is there a limit to racing's accessibility. And then into January, my word, that's not that far away, with fierce competition for young people's attention span. What odds racing passing them by? Sorry, I couldn't read the rest of that. And then finally, the enduring power of racehorses to help people exploring the horse-human connection. So do also sign up at Racing Together, and you'll get the newsletter as well to stay up to date, which is very important. I know I'm going to be heading off to have a look at some of what Mike was telling us about, because I think that's so interesting. So I hope you found it interesting as well, and we'll certainly be tuning in for the next 3 webinar series. So many thanks to Racing Together for organising everything today, and of course my panellists. But goodbye. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Hayley. Thanks, everyone.